Hey, Rockstars, Lid Shaw, and I'm coming to you here from Winter NAMM 2018. It's Saturday morning, right? And we're all just a little bit exhausted at this point. Some of us maybe more than others. But I'm standing here with Michael Carnes of Exponential Audio. Can you give us a little bit of an introduction to who you are and what you do?
I started out like most people that in this room in music, commercial music, traveled around for years. I moved into technology, and after several years in the wilderness, found myself at Lexicon in 1987. Started out with this monster product that nobody remembers called Opus, which was an 8-channel disc-based editor, 12-channel mixer. Cost a couple of $100,000 to get one, and the laptop that I had on my shoulder a minute ago can do far more than that could. Wow. So did that for a number of years, and then moved over into the Reverb segment. Did operating systems for them, and then found myself with the whole job in the mid-90s or thereabouts.
Right on. So Rockstars, just for you, when he says Reverb, he's talking about what we call reverb, right? All right. Just clarifying that.
Yeah, I just never learned the right way, you know.
So, and I should have really started off the introduction with that. Michael is a creator of some of the greatest sounding reverb I've ever heard. Actually, the greatest sounding reverbs I've ever heard. So preface it with that.
Well, that's very, very nice of you to say that. I learned from the best people in the business. I mean, my friends that taught me a lot of this were David Griesinger, who was the creator of the 480 and the 224 before that. Yeah. And also Barry Blesser, who was the inventor of the EMT 250. Right. So between the two of them, I had pretty much that stuff down, and they were always happy to give me a knock on the head if I was moving in the wrong direction. But after a while, I decided I wanted to keep moving in the wrong direction. So did a lot of the later Lexicon products, the 960L, the PCM 96 and 92, and all of their plugins and stuff. And then found myself with my own company, I suppose in direct competition with Lexicon, but they have other interests in the company now.
There's enough room in this world for all the reverb.
I sure hope so.
And it'll sound pretty cool when we hear all the reverb of this world.
Sometimes I think I've heard all of it already, and not all of it's good, but those are the ones I don't let out of the lab.
Well, so very cool. So Exponential Audio is your company that you founded as you've moved on from Lexicon, and you're creating some beautiful sounding reverbs now. I know two of them pretty well. Well, I shouldn't say pretty well. I know two of them as a beginner, and I've done some review videos of them. The NIMBUS and the R4, both of which are the best sounding reverbs I've ever used in my studio. So very cool stuff. I thought it would be very cool if you could maybe give us an introduction of what is reverb. Do you think you can kind of give us, the Reverb 101 5-minute lecture?
Yeah, well, of course, it depends on where you stand. But in the simplest way of thinking about it, a reverb is a way of making a place. And that's sort of the way the business started out. People were trying to make something sound like it was in a place. Because if you look in the earliest days of those, the 40s and 50s, really the sound of recording was the sound of a live group in a live space. And efforts in reverberation were an attempt to recreate that sense of being in a real place. So the earliest things, the chambers at Capitol, Abbey Road, all date to that date. Plates came along not too much later than that, and they all were attempts, some better than others, of sounding like a real place.
And do you mind if I interject? So, Rockstars, if you're not familiar with how these things work, so originally chambers were as simple as we're going to put a speaker in a space and a microphone on the other end and record the sound of that space, and then a plate reverb. Why don't you just explain what a plate reverb is?
Well, a plate is a big steel plate, usually a couple of feet on one side and about 4 feet on the other. And it's got one transducer. You can think of it as just a speaker driver that's attached to part of it. And then it's got a pickup that's attached. The pickup could be a piezo. It could be. I actually saw one guy who made a nice plate with a Pickering phono cartridge as the pickup. And essentially, you stimulate the plate by driving signal into it, and it kind of rattles around on that piece of steel for a while and comes out the other end. And if it's properly sprung and properly maintained, it's a pretty good sound. It doesn't sound anything like a real room,
Right.
but it's pretty neat. And that sort of drives into the second part of the question is, now if you've got one sort of effort in which a reverb is supposed to sound like a real space, but now it's, in many cases, depending on the kind of music, is another production color. Mm-hmm. And the non-realism of the plate has become very important, especially with percussion. So again, popular music went away from sounding like it was a real place a long time ago. So now people may use multiple reverbs. They'll use this plate on a voice, a different plate on a percussion, a chamber on something else, a hall on something. So you end up with a place that never could exist in the real world, but it's the way the music sounds. You have parallel efforts in which people are recording in live spaces, and they don't want it even known that it was helped with artificial reverberation. So,
right. In fact, I think of Abbey Road. Weren't they one of the places that didn't they have a system in their Studio A where they could increase the size and scope of the room with an orchestra in there by adding some feeding back delay into the speakers in the walls or something like that? I don't know if you know specifically about that.
I don't, and I've never been in the room. It's one of the places that I'd like to go, but they still to this day record fairly large orchestras in the big room at Abbey Road. There are a lot of treatments like that in some concert halls and things like that. You'll see movable panels. A lot of scoring stages where film scores are done are adjustable in the same way, so you can make them more or less reflective. But even recordings of pure classical music, which a lot of people sort of have the view that, well, this is just documenting something,
right.
And it is, but it isn't. But I don't know many of those that don't get help.
Wow, interesting.
Reverb.
Cool to hear.
Yeah, so and you don't tell.
you can reverb, but don't tell.
That's right. So it has a number of roles. It's, purely on one hand, the production color, the guitar thing with a slap on the side and a couple of reflections, and then this undulating reverb. And then the other is just I didn't know your room didn't sound that good.
Well, so I think that's where my experience with Exponential plugins comes into this discussion too. It's one of the first times I was using a plugin on a mix in my session in my studio where I started to add space and make my place sound so much more professional than it really is. It was remarkable because I do have a home studio that's sort of a step above a home studio because it's a pretty big, wonderful space. But the room itself is really not that big, And I was doing jazz mixing and then jazz recording and mixing, and I was able to use the NIMBUS and the R4. I think I used the NIMBUS for more of the way I saw it as using that for more of the, I really would just want to find real spaces, and the R4 is a little bit more experimental too and gives you more flexibility. And it has this feature on it that you showed me the first time, and I love using it. Now I just show it to other people. Even if I don't use it, I show it off, which is the freeze button. It's just so cool. So Rockstars, you can take the sound that you're running through the reverb, and you can just hit a freeze button just like you can in infinite delay that just goes forever, and you just lock in this wild reverb sound. And I kept thinking, you could completely compose music with these sounds that you get out of there.
Yeah, it's one of those things you have to be careful with and realize, wait a minute, we're on the clock. We got to get this done. But yeah, it's something I did some stuff like that at Lexicon, not as complicated, but it can be useful. You can grab a chord off a piano or something and then let that resonate while the piano goes on and does other business. Yeah. You could also use it in sound design or something like that if you want to capture put some low frequency stuff through there, and then grab it, and now you've got the background machine sounds of the spaceship or the factory or whatever.
Ooh, cool! Like creating, What do they call that in film, where you get room noise, where you just have this ambient sound that's underneath your sound stage?
Yeah, I mean it all fits under the category of room tone, and room tone is something a lot of times you want to get rid of. And it's other times, if you're creating an environment from scratch, you got to build it from scratch.
Yeah.
And they'll use anything to make it happen.
Well, so can you give us kind of just like a rudimentary introduction to what is reverb? I mean, like when we think of reverb, how does that, I know you described that there are a number of different ways that people have created it, but just generally speaking, if you play an instrument in a space and you hear reverb, what is that we're hearing?
Well, in the simplest sense, it breaks down into a couple of areas. The first is the first bounces off of the surfaces in the room, the walls and the floor and the ceiling, and that gives you a real characterization of where it is. For instance, in a bad space, those things may come too quickly, and they may actually interfere with imaging and your sense of where a signal is coming from.
I think I've heard those in some home studios I've recorded in.
Yeah, virtually every one. And that's why over recent years, people have moved more and more for cardioids, whereas, right, ideally if you can, use omnis. If you got the space for it, they sound better. But so the first reflections, which may last 50, 100 milliseconds or thereabouts, that places you somewhere. Mm-hmm. And that also helps, especially if you've got a close miking situation and you're trying to back off and get some of that leakage that you really needed, which makes the old recordings sound so nice. Early reflections added properly can give you more a sense of that, but still maintain level control and all. Yeah. After that, after the stuff bounces off the walls a few times, it turns into this other thing, and that's what people think about as the reverb tail. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things. It has a sense of width and a sense of space, but it no longer has a sense of direction. That's all gone by the time it's bounced off the walls a few times. But that gives the character to the room. Is like, like a real bright room that was all tile or plaster or stone or something like that. The high frequencies die away at about the same rate as the low frequencies. Whereas in a concert hall, it's built so that the high frequencies die away more quickly and the low frequencies hang on for a bit longer. So in an artificial reverb, you give the user the ability to adjust those things to get the sense that you want. If you're putting a chamber on a kick drum, you probably don't really want all of that low frequency stuff going on forever because it turns into mud. So if you have the ability to roll that off, you can do sort of what the real room won't do, but I mean, at this point, you're beyond reality anyway, so who cares?
Have you found that some of the users of your reverbs that you admire, that they will really put a lot of time and effort into tweaking and sculpting the reverb to like arrive at a space that maybe matches their recording studio, or if this is in post-production, I guess they have to arrive at spaces that are like that match every single shot that's changing in a film,
It's funny. Most of the time they don't, and that's why it's very important for anybody that makes reverbs to make a lot of presets and to try to organize them so that somebody can find what they need.
I'm glad you brought that up. Let's talk about how cool your organization of presets are. Another feature that you included in your plugins that I really appreciate is that you were like, why aren't people connecting the keyboard that's sitting in front of you to the plugin that you're adjusting? And so you made it very, very easy to just flip through the presets very quickly and audition different sounds, which is, when you have to reach up and scroll and grab something and go down and look and then let go and listen to the next one, that gets pretty old and tiresome pretty quickly.
Yeah, there is real time pressure in any aspect of the business now. If you're running a commercial studio, you're probably underbilling for hours, and because you want the gig and you don't want the guy down the street to get it.
Might be the fact even if you're running a home studio.
Yeah, the home studio guy generally has a little more time to play, and he should, because that's learning how that stuff works gives him the edge. But if you're talking a large studio or you're talking a film mix or anything like that, you sort of know what you're looking for, and if you can use like the search facility or my categorizations in the plugins in the presets, they'll get you close. But it really is a matter of putting the signal through and just clicking no, 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 maybe, no, definitely no.
All right. So
yes.
when you see maybe and you say yes, do you also have some system for capturing those and making sure you can come back to your shortened list?
Sure, you can just hit a button and put it on a favorites list and come back to that later.
Nice.
But again, it's sort of a matter of getting them close. And, it sort of usually works like if you can get close and quickly and find something that will do for now, then you can come back to it if you have the time and tune it a little bit. Because especially in rock music, the thing that will take more time than anything else is, why does the snare drum sound so bad? Why didn't the guy tune his drums or whatever? How do you fix it? You're moving the microphone around. You're trying to notch out a squeak on a kick drum pedal. That's where most of your time goes. Yeah. So reverb, EQ, any of those things, you got to let people get in and get done and move on.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate NIMBUS and R4 for the ways that it made it really easy for me to find a reverb that just fits my drum mix, for example, and just I can easily find that room space around a snare. You've added in features too, where, for example, I might typically want to take my reverb plugin, I might want to add an EQ to it, I might want to add a compressor to it, and now it starts to sound like that kind of produced a little bit bigger than life snare drum sound, but you've included all those right in the plugin so that you can arrive at those sounds without having to pop up 3 other plugins, right?
Yeah, and it's one of those things. What Lidge is talking about is a number of different dynamics processes that I put in there. If you want to, you can have a compressor expander before the tail. There's some other stuff when the tail comes out that you can use to push the tail down momentarily, like you've got transients and you don't want reverb stepping all over that stuff. When I started doing it, I was really thinking of the exaggerated settings. How can you push this stuff to get a sound that you couldn't quite get before?
Yeah.
But then I discovered, as I usually do, that if you use these things more subtly, you can help clean up a mix without giving away the game.
Interesting.
Just a couple of dB of duck, a little bit of this here and there, just to kind of manage what happens when transients come through. If you can, if you've got something really percussive, you've got claves or a snare or something.
Like the drum booth that's right behind us while we're doing this interview?
Yeah, we can't help that right now. Maybe Lidge can take care of that in post.
Welcome to NAMM, rock stars. Well, so now there are also some other sort of less realistic features which is what we're starting to talk about. But I remember you were showing some videos where you could take, I don't remember if it was MIDI controlled or it was like LFO controlled, sweeping EQs through the reverb and things like that. Can you kind of give us an introduction to some of the cool sounds we can get in that part?
Yeah, that's in R4, and I have 2 reverb architectures, and they basically split down so that the NIMBUS architecture is driven more toward purity. The idea is that you don't hear any sort of modulation. You can do some of it, but it's really driving toward that thing, oh, I didn't use reverb on this, right. How dare you say that? R4 is the one that drives more toward those produced sort of sounds. And it has a number of chorus styles in there. There are a couple that work inside the reverb tail, and they are, shall I say, reminiscent of reverbs that everybody knows and loves from the 70s and 80s. You can hear that swirly stuff going around as things die down. And I have a couple of different modes of that can be used individually or together. There's a second part that I just put because I could. There's output EQ on there. You can select a band pass or a couple of high passes or low passes or a notch. And the notch is probably the effect that you use the most. You can dial in a pretty narrow notch, and then you can sweep that up and down with an LFO that's built into the chorus section. Okay. So if you really wanted to sound to get toward that sound of the thumb on the take-up reel on the old analog tape recorder, then you can kind of get to that with that sort of trick.
Well, that's pretty cool. Well, I think that's a wonderful introduction to how all this stuff works. I really appreciate you taking the time out here at NAMM and kind of talking us through this and giving us a little brief introduction to Reverb. It's cool. Please let the rock stars know how they can find you guys and learn more about you and pick up your wonderful plugins.
Well, it's pretty easy. You can go to exponentialaudio.com and you can read about the different products there. I have a 3-week demo that you can get for any. You're going to need an iLock, a physical iLock, okay, but you've probably got that anyway, or you should. So you can grab the demo. It's fully functional. It's exactly the same executable. The only difference is the demo license, which elapses after 3 weeks.
Okay, cool. Right on. And then, rock stars, if you enjoyed watching this video, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and drop a comment in below and let us know if you've had a chance to use any of Michael's wonderful reverbs, or if you have any comments you'd like to make about what we were talking about, or any questions particularly about reverb that you don't think we answered and you'd like to get another answer. I'll send it to Michael and say, dude, we got to answer this one right here. So thanks for watching this, rock stars. Michael, thank you so much for being here with us on Recording Studio Rock Stars, and we'll see you around the studio.
All right. Protect your ears at this show.
I got some earplugs with me, yeah. And it sounds like the drummers are getting ready to take off. So thanks for watching, rock stars. We'll see you in the studio. Cheers.
Bye-bye.